Okay, shall we start? Well, hello everyone. My name is Santiago Duque, President of the LSESU Colombian Society. Thank you all for being here. For those of you new to the LSE, the Colombian Society is a student-led, non-for-profit, and non-political organization with over 20 years of history. Our aim is to bring high-quality academic discussion and to strengthen the ties between Colombia and the UK. I have the pleasure to welcome you to the Colombian Symposium 2021, Transitioning to the New Normal, the Path to Recovery for Colombia. During the symposium, we will have 4 different panels. Last week, we already had the health policy and education panels. And this week, we will have another 2. Next Thursday, we will have the panel of social protection, labor market, and fiscal measures. I hope you can join us there as well. But for today, we'll have the Colombian Peace Process panel. We are co-hosting tonight's event with our dear friend from the Anglo-Colombian Society. The panel is Prospered for the Peace Agreement in Times of the Covid-19 Pandemic. From the Colombian Society, we hope you enjoyed the discussion. I know that we'll have a remarkable panelist today. We'd like to apologize in advance because one of our speakers couldn't join today. Dr. Joshua Mitroti had a personal commitment and he had to travel to the countryside of Colombia in a last minute thing. However, I am sure that you will enjoy the high quality panelists that we have brought today. Let me give you a couple of housekeeping details before starting. I'm sure there will be many burning questions for our panelists, so please drop them in the Q&A function of webinar. We will read them in the second part of the event. Second, this event will be recorded. Finally, the views and opinions expressed by the panelists are those of the authors. Well, without further ado, I will introduce John Duque, member of the Anglo-Colombian Society and former British ambassador to Colombia. He had a close association with Latin America throughout his 40 years in the diplomatic service. He was head of the Foreign Office Latin America and Caribbean Department before becoming ambassador to Cuba from 2004 to 2008, and then to Colombia from 2008 from 2012. He's now a painter and a printmaker based in Oxford. John, on to you.
Thank you very much, Santiago. Well, on behalf of the Chairman Committee and members of the Anglo-Colombian Society, I'm delighted we're having this first joint event with the LSE Colombian Society, and that so many people, members and non-members, are joining us this evening. We've first-class speakers and a first-class chairperson. The question of where peace is going at the time of COVID could not be more topical. Just a few words about this Anglo-Colombian Society. It's a not-for-profit, non-political organization which seeks to improve knowledge of Colombia in the United Kingdom and to foster ongoing friendships between British and Colombian people. We believe we've been going for nearly 60 years, but we're convinced our best years are still ahead of us. Since we started, there have been big changes in the UK, in Colombia, and above all, in the Colombian presence in the UK. We strongly believe that Colombia's vigorous, multifaceted, and ever-growing presence in this country today should be recognized and celebrated as very positive for both countries, and that we as a society should play our part in this. We aim to organize about one event a month with an interesting speaker. Last month it was Wade Davis, author of the magnificent book recently published, Magdalena, River of Dreams, on Zoom from Canada. Zoom has certainly extended our reach. Once the pandemic is over, we'll once again arrange social events to bring people together. And I hope we will have more events like this. I hope all of you attending this meeting will follow up by looking at our website, www.anglocol.co.uk, and particularly our Facebook page, at Anglo-Colombian Society and see what we have to offer, keep updated, and go on to become members. You'll be very welcome. We aspire to be a natural home for everyone interested in Colombia in the widest possible sense. I said we're non-political. That means we're very happy to hear a wide range of views, and that we respect the fact that our speakers' views are always very much their own. Before handing over to our chairperson, I'd like to thank Santiago and our committee member, Yvonne Velasquez, for the huge contribution they've made to organizing this event. We couldn't have a better qualified chairperson today than Professor Jenny Pierce. Jenny is a research professor at the Latin America and Caribbean Center. She works with anthropological and participatory research methodologies on social change, violence, security, power, and participation in the region and beyond. She's a peace scholar committed to theoretical development of the field of peace, power, and violence, as well as empirical study. I owe her a lot personally. Almost exactly 20 years ago, in the spring of 2000, when I had just started as the head of the Latin American and Caribbean Department in the Foreign Office, it was Jenny who convinced me that I needed to spend more time, wake up, and take a much closer interest in Colombia, an interest that's fired me up ever since. So on that personal note, I'll hand over to Jenny as our chairperson for this evening.
Thank you very much, John, and lovely to see you again. And thank you to the LSE students and to the Anglo-Colombian Society for this invitation to chair this very important panel. As we know, Joshua Mitrote unfortunately can't be with us. So that means that our two other excellent speakers have a little bit more time to develop their ideas, and we'll still have a lot of time for a very important and significant discussion at this very historic moment for Colombia. I mean, a lot of people are suggesting that the peace process is in a very fragile state, and Colombia remains quite polarized about the future of the peace process. That means it's very timely that we've come together to reflect on it and to discuss together. Even though we might all have different views, I think it's very important that we begin to have the kind of discussion that's needed to be able to take peace forward in Colombia. I want to introduce our speakers first of all, and I'll begin with the second speaker, who is also a visiting fellow at the Latin American Caribbean Center at the LSE, Dr. Maria del Pilar López Uribe. And Maria has a very interesting set of research interests which overlap with development economics, economic history, and political economy in Latin America. She's at the moment working on a project that studies the relationship between a democratic reform and redistribution during periods of revolutionary threats. Specifically, her research draws on the experience of the organization of the peasant movement in Colombia and the direct participation of this movement in the policy-making process in those key years of 1967 to 1972. So very interesting for our discussion around the agrarian question in Colombia. She argues that governments can use other democratic mechanisms to transfer decision power from elite to a threatening group, in this case, the peasantry. So I won't say much more because I'm sure she'll be developing some of these ideas in her contribution. Now, let me just turn to Andre, who will be the first speaker of the panel. And Andre is a senior research fellow at the Winchester Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace. He's the author of a number of books on genocide, geopolitics, and transnational networks. El Triunfo del No, about the plebiscite, as you can imagine, in 2016. And he's published widely on the armed conflict in Colombia. He's also a founder member of Rodeamos el Diálogo and has done consultancies for Conciliation Resources, International Organization for Migrations, and in Colombia, the National Center for Historical Memory, the Ombudsman's Office, the Office of the High Commissioner of Peace. Many other things to say about Andre as well, but I think that's enough for you to realize that you've got two very interesting speakers. Maria is actually in Bogota, in the cold, she tells me, but we're others have been UK, also in the cold, so we had to create some heat with this discussion, but not too much perhaps. Just remember that there'll be no chance. The way it works with these Zooms is to sort of put your question personally, but if you put it in the Q&A, then I will try and group the questions after we've had the presentations from our two speakers, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can in the time we've got. So without more ado, I will ask Andre to lead us off on his presentation, which is Taking Stock of Implementation of the Colombian Peace Agreement. What is the progress of the transitional justice system during the pandemic? Thank you, Andre.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you so much, Santiago and John. I'm really grateful for the LSESU Colombian Society and the Anglo-Colombian Society for this invitation, and I'm delighted to be here with you in this such an important symposium, and very well done for organizing something like this, really very much needed in this moment in Colombia. As Jenny is saying, I'm going to discuss with you, in particular, the developments of the transitional justice mechanism over the last year. So I'm going to share my screen because I've prepared a short presentation, and I hope I'll run through this in the 15 minutes that I've been asked to talk. So let me just start by sharing with you the latest article that came in the New York Times, I think the day before yesterday. I would like to start with this quote. The New York Times says, "The success of the court, called the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, could help change the trajectory of a nation that has been at war for much of its history, with one conflict rolling almost immediately into the next." This is, I think, a fantastic quote that summarizes what is happening in Colombia at the moment. So with this as a preamble for the rest of the presentation that I want to make, I would just like to say to all of you that I cannot, of course, summarize the really important developments of the comprehensive system in Colombia in just 15 minutes. So I will have to be very schematic. I will have to simplify a lot, but I've decided that I want to sort of pick and choose some of the most important developments for those people who probably are not following very closely what is happening in Colombia in regards to the point 5 of the peace agreement between the government and the Farc, that is the point that deals with the victims' rights. So despite the pandemic, which is difficult to say when really it started, you know, whether you choose China or the UK, but let's say that I'm going to choose March 2020, that is when we went into lockdown here in the United Kingdom, namely a year ago. The transitional justice mechanism in Colombia continues to set an example for the world as the most comprehensive approach to put the victims' rights at the center of peace building. Due to the time constraints, I'm going to focus mainly on the achievements, but I'm delighted in the Q&A to discuss further challenges if you want. The transitional justice system in Colombia is made of 3 institutions, and according to the peace agreement, should be connected to reparations, taking into account the national system of victims created by the 2011 victims law, and it should be connected also to the guarantees of non-recurrence, which means the full implementation of point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.2, and 6 of the peace agreement. So the most serious challenges, in my view, are laid on precisely those 2 final points, which are to connect with a system that had been created before, in which there are government officials who should show willingness to connect with the three institutions of the transitional justice system, but also with the implementation of the rest of the points of the agreement, in which we have seen some delay in some cases. But that said, what I want to discuss now with all of you in the next few minutes is the development in each one of the three institutions of the transitional justice system. So let me start with the unit for the search of the disappeared persons in Colombia. The first thing to say is that this unit is a humanitarian institution which seeks to find the bodies, alive or dead, of more than 100,000 missed persons in the context of the armed conflict in Colombia. This unit has been working since 2018, and over the last year, that is the focus that we have in this panel, the unit for the search of the disappeared person has managed to create a national plan for the search of the missed persons. And this plan was made with the participation of more than 340 organizations. And today, they are starting to implement this plan in more than 864 municipalities across the country. And they have set up 23 teams, regional teams, to do this. The other important thing to say is that the unit over the last year has received more than 47 reports by civil society organizations, and 258 people have submitted special testimonies for the search of their missed people. At the moment, the unit is looking for more than 25,000 bodies, has given back to the relatives more than 57 bodies across the country, and has taken 214 DNA samples to try to establish the remnants that they have found. And there are 16,000 expedients, files being searched in order to try to clarify the places where these people are. Finally, what I think is really important to highlight is that recently they have discovered a universe of victims, which is quite important. That is that 769 people who were forcibly recruited have been disappeared. And these were mainly children between the age of 8 until the age of 25. So that said, I want to go to the next.
Andre, the slides are very small. People are asking if there's any way to enlarge them.
Okay, next I will go to the, I'll try to do that. Sorry, let me see if I can, is this any better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Secondly, I want to share with you the developments of the Truth, Clarification, Coexistence, and No-Recurrence Commission over the last year. I mean, the work of the commission is incredible, and I can really not make a very wide explanation of all the things that they have done. But I want to focus in particular on three things. The first is that the Truth Commission lost a Truth Commissioner to the COVID pandemic, and they had to replace Angela Salazar, who was one of the commissioners dealing with the Afro-Colombian people and the region of Urabá. This was a very difficult process for the Truth Commission, and they have replaced her with Leiner Palacios, a victim of the Farc of Bojayá. So this is, I think, something that is important to understand and to recognize that the Truth Commission, despite the challenges, has been able to bring a new commissioner, and that the 11 commissioners that are part of the Truth Commission are working towards the deadline that they have to produce the final report. When is the deadline? The deadline for the submission of this final report is November this year. And this deadline means that the Truth Commission is trying to collect all the testimonies that they come from different sectors of Colombian society. They have collected about 16,000 testimonies, and 1,600 of these testimonies have been collected from victims outside Colombia. And I think this is what I want to highlight here, because it's such an important thing that has happened over the last year in the work of the Colombian Truth Commission. Because the victims abroad are perhaps one of the most invisible sector of victims in Colombia, and people don't understand the incredible trauma that they have gone through and the suffering that they have gone through when they had to leave the country. So what the Truth Commission has done is, in particular, they have organized two very important events, one in November last year, to acknowledge and to hear victims across 23 countries in the world where the Truth Commission is collecting testimonies. And also, last February, they organized a meeting to hear the victims who had to leave the country by foot. And they organized this meeting in Ecuador, and it was called Truth Beyond Borders. Now, the collection of testimonies of victims abroad has given us a really important glance into what happened for this sector of Colombian society. And is, as you can see in the slide, that victims are spread across the world, in particular in the US, Canada, but also in Europe, and in some countries in Asia and Australia. And you can see how South America, every single country in South America has Colombian people in exile or refugees, mainly in Venezuela and in Ecuador, but not many Colombians talk about it. The numbers, according to the Truth Commission, is that they are, according to ACNUR, that more than 500,000 victims of the armed conflict have been in exile for the last 40 years. Now, the other slide that I want to show you is the one that, the other picture I want to call your attention is the one in which they show what are the countries that have received the largest number of people. This is the one on your right. But the only thing that I want to call your attention to is that if you look at the years 2017, 2018, and 2019, we see a purple line going up, which shows that, again, people since 2017 have started to ask for asylum in countries like Spain in particular. So whereas, as you can see, that the trends were going down when the peace negotiations with the Farc were going on, unfortunately, at the moment, the drama of people leaving the country has not changed in Colombia and is starting to peak again. And I think this is a really important call that the Truth Commission is going to make in the near future. Now, let me go to the next slide and quickly highlight two developments that I think are very important for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace has decided to open 7 macro cases. The last macro case was opened in 2019. And since then, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, that is the jurisdiction holding accountable the most responsible ones of the most serious international crimes, have been working documenting these cases. But in particular, towards the beginning of this year, in January of this year, there was a really important development that had to do with one of the macro cases, that is the macro case number 1, that has to do with the illegal detentions of people by the Farc. This resulted in Auto 019 that was released in January this year. And what this auto did was to do really 3 important things. First, for the first time in Colombia, an institution has been able to show that the numbers that the prosecutor office had in terms of kidnapped people in Colombia were really low compared to the universe of victims that the Special Jurisdiction for Peace has found. So according to the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, there are more than 21,000 people who have been victims of illegal kidnapping by the FARC. The second thing is that they changed the name of this case to call it the taking of hostages. That is a crime under international law. And the third most important thing is that they indicted the 8 members of the Secretariat for the responsibility of these crimes. And they have seen that within the macro case, there are at least 19 forms of victimization that have taken place during the kidnapping of people by the FARC, and that this was a policy of the FARC between 1982 and 2012. So the FARC have not acknowledged responsibility yet. They have said that they will do so, and we are expecting to hear a special hearing in April 2021. And this will be a remarkable achievement of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace and for Colombian society. And the other macro case I want to call your attention to, an important development, has been on the macro case number 03. This has to do with the extrajudicial killings, commonly called in Colombia false positives. Now, in this case, what the Special Jurisdiction for Peace has been able to do is to explain to Colombian society the findings that they have so far and how they are going to go about the next phase of the investigation before they indict some of the most responsible ones of these crimes. So what it was important about this in Auto 033 in February this year was that they managed to show that the universe of victims is much higher than the Prosecutor Office of Colombia had acknowledged, and that even the victims of extrajudicial killings in Colombia had acknowledged. What they show is that the numbers are above 6,400 people killed and dressed up as guerrilla fighters in a period between 2002 and 2010. 70% of these cases took place. And what you can see in the table below is the departments of Colombia where these cases took place. So 25% of these cases took place in Antioquia, and the rest took place in Meta, Caquetá, Cesar, Norte de Santander, Tolima, Huila, Casanare, La Guajira, and Cauca. And what the Special Jurisdiction for Peace is doing is has discovered what are the units of the army who were responsible for this in each one of these regions, and is starting to collect all the proofs to indict the most responsible ones. Now, that said, what they have done is to prioritize 6 cases. So they are going to start with Antioquia. They have put together Meta and Caquetá. They are going to research Cesar and La Guajira, and they are going to open the case of Tolima, Huila, and finally Norte de Santander. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace expects to have a final result of this by the end of this year, and to see what the people indicted for this would do to see if they acknowledge responsibility or not. So finally, I just want to highlight that the Special Jurisdiction for Peace has an investigation and accusation unit, and this investigation and accusation unit is responsible for trying to understand how is the security situation of the people who are attending the FARC who are attending the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, who are participating in the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. And they have started to show the places where there is more risk for these people who are participating, either victims or perpetrators of violence. And they are calling attention for the Colombian state to protect the lives of these people in order to make sure that justice is achieved in Colombia. So let me close just by saying that in the case of Colombia, we have the most comprehensive system of transitional justice. We have a peace tribunal that is advancing more than ever in 7 macro cases that in Colombia had never been solved, that is finding who are the most responsible ones of them. We have a truth commission that is about to submit the final report for Colombian society to hear what most of the victims have suffered in some of the regions. And we have a unit of the search of the disappeared people who are trying to fulfill a humanitarian mission to hand over the bodies of these people to the relatives. And all of this is trying to bring to an end a very difficult part of the Colombian past in order for us to deal with the past. With that, I will close my presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, Andre. That was a very lucid synopsis of what the significance of the work on transitional justice is, what it's discovering. And I think the world is looking a great deal at Colombia for how this transitional system will work and what it will deliver, not only to sustain the peace accord, but perhaps to get a new understanding of what peace building is and how justice correlates to peace building. So thank you very much for that. I would now like to call upon Maria del Pilar, who is going to talk to us on the challenges and opportunities. What are the next steps regarding the peace and human rights in Colombia?
Thanks a lot, Jenny. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Tatiana, Santiago, John, that is also here for me. It's a pleasure to be at LSE again, even if it's virtual. I spent 7 years of my life. I studied there my master and PhD. So it's always good to be back. It feels like home. Yeah, as Jenny was saying, I'm going to talk about the prospects for the Colombian peace. I don't have a presentation, so I'm just going to talk some ideas and thoughts that I have about this. So I'm going to start by saying that the 2016 peace agreement between the Colombian government and the Farc ended the conflict between them, but it also became a strong reason of division in Colombian politics, dividing on one side those who felt that the agreement was sufficiently strong to get peace and support it, and on the other side, to those who felt that it was too weak and did not punish enough the Farc. Although at the beginning, it created a big and deep division, the division was not really about whether it was right or not to negotiate and end the conflict, but instead about the concessions that were given to the Farc in return for peace. A group believed that the agreement was too beneficial to the Farc and don't agree with the Farc's right to participate as a political party, what the other group actually believed this was necessary. Iván Duque at the beginning also criticized the agreement during his electoral campaign, but the truth is that once he got into power, Duque did not fully dismantle the accord. Then the ongoing argument about the agreement gradually became less about trying to overturn the agreement, which is important. The good thing is that recently, the past year, the institutional roots of the agreement has become stronger and have grown, which has helped to reduce this type of division. Then the pandemic arrived and brought to the front a range of socioeconomic and other political issues that are related to other types of division that the country must now fight. Now the peace agreement, I believe, is not the main dividing line in the electoral campaign, which is good, but then we have other issues, right? First, there are some calls to actually mitigate these extreme polarizations that we're experiencing right now, and to work on this pact on the fundamental, which is a pact between traditional elites to get some consensus. Second, a lot of the institutions that were needed to put in place the agreement are ready now. For example, as Andre was mentioning, the justice provision for human rights violations, the reintegration of the former rebels, and the conversion of the Farc into a political party. The development of these institutions has reinforced the peace process. Any attack now to the agreement and any attempt to change it have failed. And this has shown an important growing institutional strength. At the same time, it makes the threat to tear down the agreement right now completely unfeasible. Another important and a third important element that I want to mention is the ongoing violence, mainly related to the drug trade and criminal organizations, which lie outside the scope of the peace agreement. Some critique says that the impressive increase that we have observed in the coca leaf production since 2017 is due to the agreement and to its failure. But the truth is that fighting the drug trade right now is a larger task and goes beyond the Farc issue. And that is, I believe, a dividing discussion that is at the center of the debate right now. So implementing a peace agreement is challenging at any time, but of course it has become even more difficult to implement during a pandemic. So the pandemic has called into question the government commitment to the implementation of the peace agreement, because it has suggested that resources allocated to the peace agreement might be actually sacrificed and instead being used to contain the spread of the virus and mitigate the economic impact. The government has proposed that part of the peace process funds should be used for healthcare and economic recovery. But of course, this strategy is actually not recognizing that direct linkages exist between the peace process and the pandemic response and economic recovery. So the Colombian peace process introduced this important concept of territorial peace. Related to this is this idea of peace as development, and the idea that the key drivers of conflict are linked to historical exclusion and land inequality between groups at the community level. This component has become very important to the peace process and is connected to other activities of many local organizations engaged in this grassroots peace building work. Those that are actually focusing on local empowerment through community-based processes and social leadership. So one major challenge to local empowerment continues to be targeted violence against social leaders. While it is assumed that community leadership is key to achieving territorial peace, the reality shows that local and community leaders are actually being systematically attacked by illegal armed groups as they are perceived as local threats. So the number of social leaders killed has actually increased during the pandemic. And in addition to this, in most of the territories, illegal armed groups have reinforced their control and have used the threat of a pandemic as a method to expand their control, their influence, and coerce local populations. So while there are some peace building initiatives that have tackled these difficult challenges and keep working to empower the social leadership and territorial peace, many other initiatives are being dramatically affected by violent actions against their community leaders. And as you know, when social leaders are killed, the community peace building processes they were actually leading and working on also struggling. So these issues not only affects social cohesion in those communities, but it's also a tremendous, big shock and break in Colombian democracy, and it's going to affect any effort for an economic recovery strategy in a post-COVID-19 environment. Other challenges remain. So the boom of illicit economy related to the drug trade and illegal mining of gold are seen, of course, as an opportunity for criminal organizations to operate and consolidate their territorial presence. We have observed a rise in insecurity in some areas after the FARC demobilized, areas that now have a very low or none at all state presence. In addition to this, I would like also to mention the major national strike that we had in November 2019 that was actually led by students demanding affordable and high quality education. Although the movement and the reasons behind the social unrest are not now at the center of the debate, the truth is that the social unrest and the pandemic are making also more visible other contradictions in Colombia's socioeconomic and political life that the civil conflict had long hidden. Despite these challenges, local civil society are creating new opportunities for peace, recognizing that the quarantine is a unique moment to innovate and develop skills in order to strengthen social leadership across the country and demonstrate local resilience and adaptability. And well, that's something that I want to highlight. There are important local initiatives that have shown both the challenge and importance of effort to defend this territorial peace that I was mentioned at the beginning within the context of a pandemic. There are other civil society actors that are also advocating for peace online, for example, calling for the peace implementation process to remain a key priority for the government. Sorry. The COVID context has taught us that local peace building and community-based initiatives are essential, are fundamental to activate rapid response mechanisms and allow community resources to be adapted to humanitarian emergency. So local initiative and social leaders have shown they have the capacity in these, in the last year to adapt peace building efforts to deal with this, with the conditions that the pandemic has imposed without actually affecting the peace implementation process. So in order to sustain and to keep these local peace building processes, it's essential that the central government recognize the key role that the local civil society actors play in responding to COVID-19 and protecting the peace process. It is clear that the pandemic brings major challenges. There is no bigger threat for peace than violence, that the violence that continues to target these local social leaders and the work that they're doing right now, right? Also, Colombian institutions have shown a strong resilience and strength in these demanding times and have been able to actually channel any criticisms and potential unrest, and this is good and also important to mention. And finally, I want to highlight and suggest there is important that national and local governments promote a dialogue between institutions at the central local levels and between institutions and different sectors of the civil society, these civil society actors, to protect social leaders and these local civil society actors that right now are being threatened, and to, of course, address all the concerns on other socio-economic issues that were discussed after this 2019 social unrest, and are now during the pandemic that actually have been heightened. So with this, I close.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria del Pilar. And I think you both complemented each other very well, because André gave us a sense of progress through the transitional justice system. And what you've done, Maria del Pilar, have kind of thrown up both the hopes and the challenges by broadening the discussion and enabling us also to see that well, we've had in the UK an ongoing argument about health and economics. You brought in health, economics and peace as being perhaps things that should be looked upon as complementary, not to be traded off against each other, but nevertheless, that's one of the things that kind of clearly emerges. But it's also very helpful that you did what Joshua was going to do, which is to bring the COVID-19 into this discussion and what impacts it has on the peace. And I also picked up the positive and the negative. So on the one hand, the negative obviously is that some armed actors have actually taken advantage of it to gain more control over spaces. communities, but on the other, it has shown the capacity for agency at that community level and that local level, which ought to be more recognized, both for dealing with the pandemic, but also for building peace. So I think we've got two very interesting presentations to make us all think. And I'm going to start with the questions that have come in. And what I will do is I'm going to take, for the minute, we've just got 2 questions. So I'm just going to take one at a time. If we get more in, I might have to group them. But what I will do is I'll take this first one, which I think is very prescient to what is going on at this very moment in terms of the polarization that Maria del Pilar spoke about, and I think we all recognize is part of what's going on with the peace process. So here we have a question. What can be done about the re-escalation of the rhetorical conflict between the Centro Democrático and Farc dissidents? For example, just this morning, Uribe was tweeting about Santrich moving into the Montes de Maria. So very interesting, the escalation of a rhetorical conflict. So Andrei, let me begin with you. What sort of responses do you think there could be to this escalating rhetoric?
Well, thank you, Jenny. And I think the question is very important, but I would say that there is no re-escalation. That has been the source of polarization in Colombia since 2012. And unfortunately goes beyond rhetoric. The labeling of social leaders as supporters of the Farc, the labeling of Farc as Castro Chavistas, the idea that they are, as President Duque calls the second Marquetalia, narcotalia, is being used by paramilitary groups in the regions like the Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia to target social leaders. Who are campaigning for implementation of point 1 of the agreement, who are campaigning for implementation of point 4 of the agreement. So this has been a really important strategy that was used in 2012 to campaign for the presidential elections of 2014. In 2014, the Centro Democrático almost won the presidency, but Santos managed to win on the second round. It was used again in 2016 to campaign against the peace agreement, to polarize Colombian society and mobilize people to vote against peace, saying that everyone wanted peace, but not like this. And it was used again in 2018. And in this case, actually, as well as in 2018, Centro Democrático managed to win majorities and won the presidency. And Duque has been the president of Colombia with that, using that narrative in different ways to try to stigmatize one part of Colombian society. What is happening now is that these narratives have been put to the service of the 2022 elections. So we are already in a political campaign. And I guess one of the things that the Centro Democrático is going to try to use is the idea that communism is just around the corner, that Colombia, again, is going to become the next Venezuela if someone votes for someone who is not close to the Centro Democrático, whether it's Fajardo, whether it's Petro, whether it's Roy Barreras. And that's like we are in the middle of a political campaign, and that's the challenge of reconciliation for a deeply divided society, is to get over this polarization and create majorities of people who understand that actually the stigmatization that has been used to divide the nation needs to be overcome in order to be able to have a different future together in which we can coexist without resorting to violence.
Thank you, Andrei. Let me give that question to you, Maria del Pilar, as well. Do you think this is new rhetoric or an escalation, or has it always existed, or particularly?
I think it has always existed. I mean, this is not the first time that we're actually going through this post-conflict times we have in our recent history in the last 89 years, more than 5-6 peace process, and most of them have failed. So I don't think this is something new. I think this is quite common. I mean, I would say that to address this, it's important to say that a big part of the FARC is still committed to the agreement, but I think that this kind of like conflict between the dissidents of the FARC and this speech of the Centro Democrático about how to address these dissidents has to be related, have to be addressed in two different ways. First, I think it's very important that the government commits to the implementation of the peace process at the territories, right, at the local level. And I think right now is failing to do that. And the second thing, and what I'm saying is that most of the regions where actually the FARC were before, and they were supposed to be replaced by the government, more state presence in these regions is not happening right now, right? So the FARC left, but the government is not arriving. So this is one part. So it's important that actually the government and the state commit to the implementation of the peace process in the territories, goes there, more public good provision, more security, more opportunities. And the second part I would say is this relationship with the drug trade and the illicit economies that are related to this drug trade and illegal mining of gold. Because of course, this is an opportunity for criminal organizations, and these are economic resources for these FARC dissidents that potentially can actually, grow over time. So it's important. I don't think this is new, but I think we are still on time to actually address this problem by first implementing the peace process and what the government commit, what they actually signed the peace accord at the local level, right, in the territories, which is not happening right now. And the second one is to also address all this problem of this boom of illicit economies, because it's an opportunity for criminal organizations to operate and actually consolidate their territorial presence in these areas, because that also is an important source for economic funding for these FARC dissidents.
Thank you very much. I've now got two questions for Andre, which are more or less about the HEP, and then I will come back to Maria del Pilar with some other questions that have come in for her. So Andre, from Diego Suarez, a student at the MSc in International Political Economy at the LSE. Diego asks, the Law of Justice and Peace, Law 975 of 2005, included 5 macro cases, among which one was sources of illegal financing and gender violence, forced abortions and murder, gender-based murder, I think he's saying, which is the reason that the HEP did not include sources of illegal financing as one macro case, and that gender violence was taken as a cross-cutting issue. What are the reasons for that, he's asking, but the HEP did not include sources of illegal funding and the gender violence as macro cases. And then Peter Taylor asks, has Colombia looked at how Argentina looked into the desaparecidos scenario, where they found the military very unwilling to assist? So I think that is about how is it that Argentina hasn't able to delve into the issue of disappearances, either partly because the military resisted that investigation. So I'll give you those two, and then Maria del Pilar, I'm afraid you're not going to be able to rest. I shall be coming to you back to you.
Thank you, Jenny. I think I'm going to start responding the second one. Well, let me respond in this way. I really want to make a parallel here. If we think about the case of the FARC and the case of the false positives, the FARC came out as soon as the Special Jurisdiction for Peace released the Auto 019. The FARC took a couple of days and did a press release saying, we respect the special jurisdiction for peace. We will gather together and we will then produce a formal communique explaining what our position on this is. 3 hours after the special jurisdiction for peace released Auto 033, that was the one to do with the military, the commander of the army in Colombia tweeted a video full of snakes going around saying, the enemies are trying to destroy us. We are not gonna let them do it. So yes, I think that gives a very clear indication of what's happening in Colombia. The army is not willing to acknowledge responsibility, even though 1,400 members of the army have been under investigation by the prosecutor's office. And some of them were already in jail and now are out of jail receiving benefits for participating in the special jurisdiction for peace. And they have been denied the wrongdoings. But what is probably very likely to happen to them, and I think this is the reason why they are very concerned now, is that the special jurisdiction for peace has got the information to indict them. And if they do that and they don't contribute with the whole truth, they will have to end up paying 20 years of jail. So I think now we are in a turning point in which the military in Colombia are starting to realize that the stakes are high. And even President Juan Manuel Santos, former President Juan Manuel Santos, said that he was willing to come before the special jurisdiction for peace to contribute to the truth of what happened, because he was Minister of Defense in 2008 when this scandal of the false positive took place in Colombia. So probably with that, I answer the second question. And the first question, the first question, I think the student is mistaken. The Justice and Peace law did not open macro cases at all. The Justice and Peace law offered the opportunity to members of the paramilitary groups, the most responsible ones, to come before the tribunals and to tell the truth that they had. And because of that truth telling, they could go and pay 8 years of prison in a jail in Colombia, and some of them were extradited to the US because apparently didn't tell the whole truth. But what really happened, again, so what they did was to tell the truth, but there were no macro cases trying to explain the dynamics of the different fronts of how they were operating. The ones who did that research, the institution in charge of understanding the complex dynamics of the different blocks of the paramilitary groups, was the National Center for Historical Memory, who had to create a special unit within the center called the Unit of the Acknowledgement of the Truth, who managed to collect all the information of the foot soldiers who needed to come before the National Center for Historical Memory to tell the truth, so that they did not have to pay jail time. And for that reason, none of the foot soldiers of the 30,000 paramilitary groups paid 1 day of jail, because they came and gave these reports, these testimonies to the National Center for Historical Memory. And they wrote these books explaining a bit the dynamics, but there were no macro cases. In the case of the special jurisdiction for peace, the 7 macro cases are not only related to different actors or different crimes, like kidnapping in the case of the Farc, or force positivism in the case of the army, but also looking at regional dynamics. So there is a case to understand what happened in Urabá, there is a case to understand what happened in Nariño, there is a case to understand what happened in Cauca, and there is a case to understand what happened to the Patriotic Union in particular and to the youth. So those are the 7 macro cases that are open at the moment. And it is not clear if in this moment there is going to be a macro case on gender violence. It is very likely that it's going to be a macro case because the HEP is still collecting information and reports in order to open new macro cases. And this would be a development that we will see in 2021. Probably we will have new macro cases opening up. And that was what the HEP would do.
Thank you very much, Andre. And now over to you, Maria del Pilar, with two questions more focused on the implementation of the agreement. So from Marcelo Sainz in London, what do you think are the main advances and risks in the implementation of the agreement in the territorial spaces where the ex-guerrilla people are, the demobilized areas? So that's one. And then from Paul Hasselbrink, Universidad del Norte, he asks you, you mentioned how the institutions have been solid enough not to be torn down. However, there is still public support for getting rid of them. How can institutions do a better and more integral job at keeping themselves as legitimate in the eyes of the broader public? I'm assuming that the question means the peace institutions. Yeah. So could you take those two, please?
Yeah, can you repeat the second one? I'm sorry.
Yes. So this is a question to you specifically about the discussion on institutions, which I think he means peace institutions. So you mentioned how the institutions have been solid enough not to be torn down. However, there is still public support for getting rid of them. How can institutions do a better and more integral job at keeping themselves as legitimate in the eyes of the broader public?
Well, the second one is a little bit difficult to answer. Okay, with respect to the first one, the advances and risks, I mean, I would say there's has been some progress in some regions where the Farc were actually present before, especially in some places where the illicit economies were not as strong. Or were not that strong. So in those places, advances is the state is actually getting there. I think also there is an important advance in empowering local communities. So I think at the territory level, once the Farc left, I think depending on the region, of course, you could actually say that the state at some level, you know, in terms of security, in terms, for example, of political participation, more political participation, and in terms of like local institutions and some public good provisions, you can actually say there's some progress, especially in those regions where the drug trade was really low before. The situation is a little bit different where the illicit economies are strong, right? Now, what are the risks? Of course, you know, empowering these local communities also, you know, is related to social leaders that are more visible. And of course, this means that as the local social leaders are becoming more visible, their faces, I mean, they're actually seen in some cases as threats for local power and for these criminal organizations that could be around there in those places where actually the state is not as present as you would expect. So this is one risk. And the other one is the one that I was mentioning, in those regions where the Farc was very strong, and also you have a lot of coca leaf production, the state presence is weaker, and in that case, I would say that they're living like a space that can actually be filled by criminal organizations, and well, of course, this is a risk that could actually escalate in the short and middle term. And then the second one, well, what I was saying is that, yeah, I mean, there are some peace institutions that have some kind of like public support to get rid of it. But my point is main that the electoral campaign that is coming, you know, all these the political discussion that is around the electoral campaigns that are coming, the elections that are coming next year, are not going to be really around you know, overturn the agreement or not, right? And especially this is true, especially because some of these institutions that were actually needed to put in place the agreement are right now ready. And what you can actually see is that even when we have right now a government that is, directly opposing in many ways the agreement, and he has tried in many ways to attack the agreement and to, try to make it fail. What we observe is that the institutions have shown some strength, important strength over this time. So I don't think it's gonna get worse than what we are right now in terms of the institution, because they're becoming stronger and stronger. So also at the same time, because this institution are becoming stronger, it makes this threat to tear down the agreement completely impossible to fulfill, right? And in some of the institutions that I was mentioned are, for example, this justice provision for human rights violation, the institutions around the reintegration of the former rebels and the Farc's political party. So these type of institutions are taking place right now when we have a government that directly opposed to the agreement, or like incumbent that and a political party that is very strong in Congress that directly opposed to the agreement, and still they haven't been able to make this institution weaker. On the opposite, they actually are becoming stronger, and also because there is also this international support around it that makes these attempts to make fail the agreement impossible.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm going to make you work even harder. There's another question for you, Maria del Pilar, and then I've got some lovely ones coming for both of you. And just to say, someone wanted to raise their hand to ask a question, but we're not doing it that way. Sorry for that person. Can you put your question in the Q&A box in writing? Right. So this is a question that goes to the financing issue around drugs and violence, and it says the following: the FARC financed itself through narco-trafficking. If narco-trafficking was not put into the peace agreement, it would have been clear, as I interpret what the question is saying, it would have been clear that it is clear that the illegal business would have had other owners anyway. How is it possible to stop the violence in the region if drug trafficking is still alive, right? Is it possible to do anything about the ongoing violence while drug trafficking remains a problem?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm very positive about this. I mean, the problem is, I know you are recording right now, but I mean, the problem is that this government is just a mess, right? But of course, it's possible to reduce violence in those places when we have these illicit economies. I mean, one way, and actually it has been very successful, even if it's a very small scale, is crop substitution, right? Is actually the state going there and make more present, being more present and increase, for example, the public good provision. What we have observed is that when we actually have this local crop substitution through, for example, giving peasants access to land, to property rights, where you actually give peasants access to productive projects, you observe a reduce in this of violence and reduce in coca leaf production in those places. So of course, there are some ways where you can reduce violence, and this is of course related to violence, right? But it's important that the government first aerial suppression is not the right way to reduce the coca leaf production. It has to be other way, because it has been proved that it's completely it's a complete failure to do it that way. But also that's not enough. It's not enough to substitute the crop if the state is not going there and be present and then provide access to markets, provide roads, provide access to education, all these type of things. That it has to be one-to-one with the substitution of the illegal crops. So I'm actually a bit positive about this. The problem is that we have right now government where the state in many of these regions, especially in the ones where the coca production is more solid, is not getting there. right? It's actually deviating sometimes the funds that were supposed to go to these areas to other, other sources. And at the same time, the strategy to attack the drug trade, I believe, is not the right one right now. I mean, it's not the right now. So yeah. Well.
Thank you very much indeed. Lots to discuss in that one. But I've got here a lovely question from Dudley Ankerson, which is going to make you both think. It's certainly making me think. If Maria del Pilar and André were president, I don't know whether either of you have that aspiration, how would they prioritize their policies in support of peace implementation? What would these concrete policies be? Not statements of intent, and how would they fund them? Thank you for putting them on the spot. And I go to you, André, to get you to be president of Colombia for a few minutes.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, huh? But I think like trying to also, add to some of the discussion around some of the issues that Maria del Pilar has been asked. So the first thing that I would do is to call the National Commission for Security Guarantees. I mean, it's unbelievable that the peace agreement created a national commission that should meet on a monthly basis, headed by the president. And since Duque took office, has been called by him 3 times. And it's unbelievable, really. And the importance of this National Commission for Security Guarantees was not only that it was led by the president, but that it was connected to the comprehensive system for the protection of the political organizations in the regions. So this was a really important measure of communication between the central government and the local actors. And the problem is that the current government, it has taken a traditional national security approach that privileges force against the organizations. And this is not including grassroots organizations in defining the national security policy. So that would be the first thing that I would do. It's a very clear sort of thing. And I don't think would cost that much having the ministers quite near me. The second thing is related to what Maria del Pilar was saying. I mean, I think, instead of investing in sort of building a strong military in the regions, what I think we need to do is to take a different approach to security and to solve the issue of coca crops. And that was the agreement tried to do in point 4. So what we need to do is to go back to the voluntary coca crop substitution program that was connected to development plans in the regions and that was connected also to something really important that was and this would be the third thing that I would do, the agrarian jurisdiction to solve problems about land titles in Colombia. So doing those 3 things, I think I will strengthen the 3 main problems that I see in this moment in terms of implementation, where the money would come, and probably I would just turn again to the Biden administration and say, hey, here we are, now that you have a different approach to Trump, now that you are saying that you did not support the hardcore strategy to use the military to destroy drugs. Well, let's take the approach that Obama and Santos were already thinking about in 2014, 2015, when they recognized that the war on drugs had failed. So that would solve the very important issue that we have. Now, I will close by saying this. There are perverse links between regional elites and national elites and criminal actors. They are not interested in implementing a land reform in Colombia. And that's the main problem. The very powerful people around the president of Colombia and around, in the different institutions who see with very serious distrust the peace agreement in Colombia because it touches upon their economic interest and their political interest on those regions. And transforming that means to get a new president who hasn't got those close links to these actors who have benefited for the last 50 years of the armed conflict. So, that I think is something that we need to take into account. Structural reforms in Colombia need to take place, and that is costly and painful for the traditional elites.
Thank you very much, Andre. And President Maria del Pilar, the first woman president.
Jenny. Well, I want to say that I'm not interested at all in being president, but I might sound like a politician right now. So, I mean, you can think of implementing some real or try to enforce some real political participation of these minorities. But I just want to follow what Andre was saying about, we have two different Colombians here, the people who actually live in the cities. We don't have a clue about how the state and how the institutions work in the rural areas. So one thing is to actually, one thing that I would do is to, of course, move a lot of these institutions that are actually working a little bit better in the cities to the regions, to the local levels. And then I would go completely, I would focus, of course, there's so many issues in Colombia to address, but I would focus a lot in the first point of the peace agreement, implement a proper land reform in Colombia. Historically, we haven't implemented a good and actually a land reform that had positive effects on land distribution. This hasn't happened. And one of the main reasons behind that was also what Andre was saying, is because the local rural elites are so powerful that they actually block any attempt to implement a proper land reform. So one of the things that you have to think about is how to, make these local rural elites that historically have accumulated land and have accumulated a lot of political power to actually sit, negotiate, or somehow do something that actually they can accept that, for example, a proper land reform can be implemented. And I would say that one of the reasons, one way to do that, for example, is to empower local communities more, which is not happening right now. One part of why these local rural elites are so powerful is because there is still these kind of paternal relationships, that occur at the local levels, where the communities are so weak because they are not part of, they don't engage in politics, they don't participate in politics as they can actually do it, or in economics activities, independent economic activities. So I would say, main thing would say, first point of the peace agreement, land reform, which means property titles, land titles, also more state presence through public good provision, because again, given access to land to the peasants, given titles to the peasants is not enough. You also have to be, this has to be linked to other type of activities, for example, access to credit, access to technology to increase productivity, and of course, access to markets. So it has to be, but this is not going to happen without the state. So the state has to go to the rural areas and to the territories and try to go for the land reform. I hope I didn't sound so like a
I'll let everyone decide who they'll vote for when it comes to president.
Jenny, I have to leave right now because I have another commitment. So right. I have to move to another meeting that I have. But I mean, thank you so much for
Thank you very much, Maria del Pilar. Very, very interesting. And I'm sorry, Andre, you've got the last 4 questions for you, but in fact, we've only got sort of 7 minutes left. So they'll have to be short answers anyway. So thank you, Maria del Pilar, for all your insights and for your optimism. I think you've brought a spark of hope to when many people are feeling rather worried about the peace process.
Well, I mean,
So thank you.
I also feel a little bit worried about the peace process, but I try to be, optimistic. Yeah, that, I mean, we still have a lot of things to do. But anyway, thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Santiago, Tatiana, who actually invited me. Thank you so much. Well, Andre, it was a pleasure to actually share this symposium
Bye,
with you.
Maria del Pilar.
Bye,
Lovely to meet you.
And everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. So Andre, there's 4 last questions, right? And I mean, you haven't got much time, so I'm going to give you them, but you can decide sort of, which you would like to respond to. So from Michael Soto, can we respond to the polarized context in neutral form? Are we talking about 2 extremes that are equally positioned and culpable? Perhaps Andre could elaborate on the work of Rodeamos el Diálogo and how one's own positioning should or shouldn't be involved in trying to overcome polarization. I want to link that to another question from Isabella Munoz. What do you think are the duties of citizens that were bystanders to the conflict in the reconstruction and peace implementation? So those 2, and then there are 2 more. One actually was from Maria del Pilar, but I'll summarize it as at least it's registered, and then one final one. And so if you could answer each of these in 3 minutes, I'll be very happy.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, no, let me just try to answer the first one quite quickly. I think it is possible in the context of a polarization to try to listen to the different sides. It's very important to try to understand what a society has gone through in an armed conflict like Colombia, where there are 9 million of victims, and to distinguish between perpetrators and the rest of society. And it's important to understand that there are many perpetrators who want to deny their responsibility because they have managed to get away with murder for many, many years. Perhaps in this moment, we're going to see the Farc, who has always been pointed. For them, it's going to be easier to acknowledge responsibility because it's always been pointed that they did it. But there are many people behind the scenes who have denied that for years and are not willing to come out to accept that responsibility. So the role of what civil society needs to do is to transform the emotions that come out of hearing the horrendous things that have happened in the past, to come to terms with this, and we can try to modify and be self-critical in order not to stigmatize and polarize, but really call for people to acknowledge responsibility for the wrongdoings, because only like that, Colombian society will be able to look to a different future in which what we have done, happened to us in the past, is not repeated. And the duty of people who were not part of the conflict, this is perhaps one of the most important things and a really important wake-up call. Let's think about the peace referendum in Colombia. The peace referendum, only 37% of the people went to the polls, which meant that 63% of people didn't care. In Colombian elections, roughly 50% of the people don't vote. They think that that's nothing to do with them. They think that they cannot change reality. And actually, because of that position, is that we have continued to inherit the problems of the past. So this is an opportunity for broader sectors of Colombian society to recognize the important role that they can play in peace building, to understand their country better, to understand the suffering of different sectors of Colombian society better, and to be able to be forgiven with those who have done terrible things in the past, but are willing to acknowledge responsibility and pay sentences so that they can rebuild the social fabric of those communities that they harmed.
Thank you very much, Andre. So we now have two final questions, but one, I don't think, one was for Maria Pilar and she won't be able to answer it, but I want to register it because a very interesting question from Gwen Bernit, which is, it's about the economic impact of Duque's government. She asks, the Financial Times recently reported that Colombia's investment grade status is on a downward trend. Is this partly due to Duque's incapacity to maintain the quality of international relations that Santos had established? Could Colombia end up leaving the OECD, for example? And does this have an impact on the prospects of peace in a context of reduced international support? But this issue of the international aspects of the peace process is the final question. So I think it links with Gwen's question from Camilo Cárdenas, which is, how do you believe the pandemic allowed the Colombian government to avoid international strictures and surveillance on the actual implementation of the peace agreement? Do you believe that after COVID-19, the Colombian peace agreement will be, or even could be, taken again to the international agenda? So that's a very good last question, I think.
Well, Camilo, thank you so much for that question. I actually think, I might be mistaken on this, but I don't think the COVID pandemic has a huge impact on the importance of the peace process in the international community. Actually, I just read a really important article in which the United Nations research policy team shows how the role that the UN Security Council play in protecting the peace agreement has been fundamental to avoid the derailing of the peace process in Colombia. So I think that despite all the challenges that the international community has faced thanks to the COVID pandemic, the eyes have been put in Colombia. They haven't taken their eyes off Colombia. The EU has played a fundamental role supporting the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the Truth Commission, and the Unit of the Search of the Disappeared People. The same, the UN Security Council throughout the last 2 or 3 years. And I think that if Colombia has a reason to be hopeful today, it's not because of domestic politics. It is because actually of international politics. The arrival of Biden is a good news for Colombia, is a good news for the implementation of the peace agreement. Probably is not going to be a rose picture as many people thought, but it's still a step forward. And the UN is going to continue to be side by side to the implementation of the Colombian peace agreement. And all of this is going to have a really important impact for 2022. And I'm pretty sure that Colombia is on the way for building peace in the long term. Whether this is going to take us the 15 years that the parties thought when they signed the peace agreement, or it's going to take us 50 years more, as John Paul Lederer usually says, that peace building lasts at least as long as the conflict lasts, is a second matter. But I think the international community is the key ally, and thanks to that was built by Santos during his presidency, we can still talk about a peace agreement that is being poorly implemented in Colombia, and that the prospects for peace are still there. Hopefully, and with this I close, Jenny, hopefully this means also that there is a different way to look at solving the conflict with the ELN, because we haven't spoken about the ELN, and the ELN, the last insurgency in Colombia, is a really important actor that needs to be dealt with in order to solve the puzzle of peace building in Colombia in the long term.
Thank you very much, Andre, and to Maria Pilar for a really insightful contribution to what is an incredibly challenging moment for the history of Colombia. I know Santiago is going to say the final words, but I want to say I was very impressed how in that little space of time we covered so much, even though we know there's so much more to cover. And I was also extremely impressed by the positivity, right? When at the moment there are lots of elements that are giving us room, sort of space for depression, the murdering of social leaders and activists, the massacres that have taken place, and of course of the demobilized. But actually there's a lot of impetus to keep this peace process going. And I think that question of how everybody can participate in that, in doing so, and Andreas reminded us how few people actually voted in the plebiscite. So I think that the peace issue must be something for everybody, for all citizens. And if that can emerge after having debates like that, like this one, I think that could be very positive. So thank you all very, very much. And I'll hand over to Santiago for the last words.
Thank you, Jenny. So first of all, Andre, thank you very much for all the insights provided in the presentation. I know that this topic is of a lot of interest for many people in Colombia and abroad, and I think that the insights provided in this conference were of very high level. I would also like to thank you, the people from the Anglo-Colombian Society, which also made this conference possible, Yvonne, John, all the members of the Anglo-Colombian Society. And as well, I would like to say thank you to the committee members of the Colombian Society, which also played an important role in this conference. Finally, I would like to invite you to our next event, which is going to be on the 11th of March, next Thursday, which is the social protection, labor market, and fiscal measures. And well, I hope you can join us there. And for the Anglo-Colombian Society, I hope we can have other events together. I don't know if John wants to say something additional. Thank you very much for all who joined us today.
Well, just to say, I think it's been a really very high-level professional event, and I think we've had some very, very stimulating contributions. So thank you very much, and thank you to the LSE Colombian Society, and thank you to all those who organized it.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.